In Kengan Ashura, there are few characters that are as iconic as the man named Kanoh Agito. It's almost unanimously agreed upon by fans that Agito represents everything that made Kengan Ashura great. You don't have to look any further than his arc that ran from the KAT tournament to Kengan Omega to understand why people don't just like the characters from Kengan but adore them and have a strong sense of attachment to them. So without any further ado, let's take a deep dive into the story of the one and only Fang of Metsudo. The very first appearance of Kanoh Agito was in chapter 39 of Kengan Ashura. We'd get a complete look at Agito's design for the first time. Black suit, imposing size and stature, and a cold, stern expression with zero emotions. It's obvious from the get-go that this guy is a big deal. This was the chapter where every character got their pages and their introductions to the audience. And Agito appears at the very last page, instantly giving us the impression that he's at least one of, if not the final boss of the tournament. But I think it's fair to say that none of us was truly ready for the surprises that were in store. The very first fight of Agito was against Okubo Naoya, who in simple terms is the strongest celebrity MMA fighter in the Kengan universe. This was a slightly predictable matchup because number one, it was a round 1 fight, and number 2, because Sandrovich makes it pretty clear that Agito is the bigger deal. Agito's entrance alone tells you he's undefeated and a favorite to win the entire tournament. And in the intro to this fight, we get this very first look at the kind of person Agito actually is, when Okubo would jokingly compare him to Zetten, a kaiju character from the Ultraman series. And Agito responds by asking if Zetten is strong, having zero clue that Okubo is referring to a fictional character. And when Okubo retorts by explaining that Zetten is one of the most well-known final bosses, Agito would ask again about this final boss and what martial art he uses. This was without a doubt a funny, quirky scene, but nobody made a big deal out of it at that time because we did not know what it was indicative of. But anyways, the match would begin, and after some intense back and forth, Okubo would land a nasty kick on Agito's face. This should have and would have finished any other normal opponent, but Agito would slowly rise from the ground, and we'd get this iconic shot. By this point, you knew it was over for Okubo. But at the time, this moment only reinforced the belief that Agito would turn out to be some sick crazy final boss. Agito would deliver what I assume is a belly-to-belly suplex to Okubo, and here we'd get a very crucial moment for Agito's character. Because Agito would pull his punch at the last minute, essentially sparing Okubo's life, and not using more violence than is needed to win. This was a strong hint that there may be more to Agito's character than just a stoic final boss. And we would get to find out more about this come the semifinals, when Agito fought Kuroki Gensai. This was the first time we actually got to see Agito's backstory. Agito was originally an orphan from mainland China. At some point he'd be picked up by the other Tokita Nico, or Tiger Nico as the fans like to call him, and become his student. As we all know, Kanoh Agito was part of the Gu ritual, where all of Tiger Nico's students would be sealed off in a chamber and forced to kill each other until there's only one left. Agito would win his fight and later be discovered by Katahara Metsudo, the 58th chairman of the Kengan Association. During Metsudo's first encounter with Agito, he had this animalistic look, completely covered in blood with no life in his eyes. The Gu ritual is important for multiple reasons. As inhumane and horrific of an experiment as it is, this is the backbone that Agito's character was built on. The Gu ritual essentially robbed Agito of his humanity. It turned him into an animal who only knows how to fight for survival. But that doesn't mean he's inherently evil. He would have become evil if he completed the Gu ritual and also went on to operate under Nico for longer. We know this because that's what happened to Lutien, and that's why Metsudo is so important. Him adopting Agito essentially prevented this from happening. And by the time Metsudo picked him up, aside from his animalistic fighting spirit and the negative emotions associated with the Gu ritual, Agito was nothing more than a blank canvas. He's neither evil nor extraordinarily virtuous, just an uneducated wild kid. Metsudo's goal was to fill the blank canvas with kindness and also wash the animalistic stain off of Agito. Despite his best efforts, he would not succeed all the way. We get to learn that these faces that Agito makes when he uses the formless and the moments when he refers to himself as we are byproducts of his experience in the Gu ritual. So his animal side still remained by the time we got to see him in Ashura, even though he had been under Metsudo for decades by that point. But it makes sense because if Agito had overcome everything there is to overcome by the time he appears in the story, there'd be no arc for us to see. The arc would have been completed in the flashbacks already. And sure enough, his last trial to fully overcome his beast state of mind and become a complete human would come soon. This journey began after his fight with Gao Lang, and more noticeably in the semifinals against Kuroki. One of Agito's biggest strong points is being able to adapt to his opponent and create a counter for him on the fly. This is part of Agito's evolution. And in his fight against Kuroki, the biggest evolution that Kanoh would make is wielding both formless and martial arts with the same proficiency, and lessening the time lag he takes to switch between the two. But all of this information is more than just pseudoscience exposition dump. This evolution is a metaphorical way of saying that Agito has started to truly control his animalistic side. Because after all, martial arts and formless quite literally represent the stoic and animalistic personalities of Agito respectively. And as we all know, Agito would lose in this legendary fight, and this too was needed. He had to lose. Because after decades of fighting and not losing even once, Agito has hit a ceiling in terms of his development as a person. If he just keeps winning and winning, he might never experience other things in life, and that's why Matsudo went out of his way to invite Kuroki. The loss to Kuroki marks an end of an era in more ways than just Agito's win-loss record. Agito has been fighting all this time just to repay Matsudo, which again is pretty wholesome. And these words by Matsudo imply that his duty has been fulfilled. It's what Matsudo himself wants, that Agito goes out there and experience new things. That's why Agito retired as the Fang, and so began his real journey. What's special about Agito is that with him, you really have to read all the extra chapters and the small moments to really understand his full character. What you get out of him in the tournament is just the amazing fights and small hints of his personality. It's what happens outside of the tournament that really tells you what kind of person he is. In the very last chapter of Kengan Ashura, we get this beautiful moment between Agito and Minoru Takayama. We see Agito smiling and in good spirits, and we learn that he came to collect the keys to a motorbike of all things. He stopped referring to himself as we, and he's finally enjoying himself for a change, without the burden of being the Fang or having to worry about death and violence. How can you not love this character? He's the guy that went through unimaginable pain and tragedy and missed out on every normal leisurely activity that you can think of, but thanks to Matsudo, however late it may be, he has a second chance at life. A nearly 40-something guy that can fight like a monster, experiencing everything for the first time, and being a dork. It's hard not to feel for him. The next time we saw Agito was in chapter 26 of Kengan Omega. In America, living his best life, even making biker friends, which tells you just how much more social he's become. And the best part, he's even making jokes, telling Himuro Ryu that he's forgotten his name just to mess with him, prompting Himuro to comment that Kanoh has indeed changed. This arc that we've been on since Kengan Ashura would come to a full circle in the KVP tournament. So far, Kanoh has distanced himself from the memories of the Gu ritual, and he's no longer tormented by those events. But now it's time to face them again and conquer his demons for good. Kanoh's opponent would turn out to be Lutien, another one of Nigo's disciples that went through the same Gu ritual that Kanoh did. But like I mentioned earlier in this video, for Agito, it was like staring at an evil version of himself, because Lutien had no Matsudo to save him. He inherited all of Nigo's lunacy, and this is what Kanoh would have become if Matsudo never met him. This fight is not exactly the most well received by the fans, but as far as closing up Agito's arc, it does its job pretty well. Agito's lines in this fight are especially really good. This fight is all about highlighting how Lutien can defeat Agito simply because Agito is someone who, unlike Lutien, did not let the influence of Nigo consume him. After soundly defeating Lutien, Agito will share a sincere moment with Okubo, his very first on-screen opponent who he has now become friends with. And with that, everything has come full circle, and Agito is ready to move on. Agito goes on to become one of the most dependable veterans of the story, going as far as to express concern for someone like Gao Ryuki, the adoptive grandson of Gao Bukaku, who has been brainwashed into believing that his only purpose in life is to kill members of the Worm. Kanoh sees himself in Ryuki and wants him to understand that he can become more than just what he's been unwillingly conditioned to be. When the time comes, I have no doubt that Agito will become a priority in the story again when the Taiga Nigo arc begins. Agito is without a doubt one of Sandrovich's own favorite characters, and it's understandable why. Agito is the guy that people point to when they praise Kengan's character writing. Agito could have been edgy, or he could have been a generic stoic final boss, but just making him a genuinely likable, affectionate character with a clear sense of direction and growth might be the single most significant decision that Sandrovich ever made. It's Kanoh's development that made people go, "Oh, Kengan is not what I expected it to be." This comment right here sums up how people feel about Kanoh. A beast-like final boss who in reality is just a dorky honest man who was robbed of his humanity, which he eventually gained back thanks to the kindness of one man. And that is the story of the Emperor Kanoh Agito. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more.